doesn't have to look or feel like what it looks or feels like for anybody else. It's really just at the end of the day, can I attach myself to a higher power that will help me to, live a better life?
Managing your money was the biggest reason I felt like we failed. So,
Hmm.
and the integrity was huge that we got in such a pickle financially that we had to start cutting corners in some areas, and it was just bad business. I've allowed some bad habits to develop, calling in sick on Mondays regularly,
Hmm.
and not really putting my foot down out of fear of not being able to replace them. My decision making or my choices got us to where we're at. And if somebody's not following that to the T, you know, letting my guys not be totally accountable all the time because of the manpower issue.
Hello, friends. I'm Adam Loveridge, and welcome to the Home Services Marketing Podcast from Growth to Acquisition. I'm the owner and founder of Blue Forge Marketing. We are a home services marketing agency specializing in heating and air conditioning, plumbing, remodeling, and garage door contractors. For more information about Blue Forge Marketing, visit us online at blueforgemarketing.com. Hello and welcome to the Home Services Marketing Podcast from Growth to Acquisition. My name is Adam Loveridge with Blue Forge Marketing, and today I'm really excited to be joined by Scott Grimes with Grimes Heating and Air out of Orrville, California. Scott, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you very much.
I'm real excited about this episode because it's pretty rare that I get to talk about stuff that's near and dear to my own heart, and particularly in this case, we're going to be talking about recovery. For our listeners, I think that really all of us love a hero story at the end of the day, right? Somebody who's had to go through adversity, overcome challenges, and I think it really is that that story that so many people resonate with in a deep way. And I know, Scott, that you've had one of those hero stories where life started out pretty turbulently for you, and particularly drugs and alcohol. And I have a similar background. And earlier in this call, we were both talking about our participation in Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step fellowships and things along those lines. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into that and hearing more about your story and how you've overcome a lot of this adversity and gotten to where you are now. And I'm really excited too to really be talking about kind of what the next layer of evolution looks like for Grimes Heating and Air and for you as a person. And so kind of take us all back here, Scott. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got kind of started in the heating and air space.
My childhood was probably as picture perfect as anybody could script a childhood. My mom and dad both stayed married all through my growing up. And I had a big family, and probably like any kid, I had injuries along the way, were things that I interpreted the way things went. So there were some insecurities and some things where the outcome of the way I interpreted some of it is that I was uncomfortable in a room of people thinking I was different, somehow. And when drinking came into play in my life, it seemed to kind of solve that problem. A couple of drinks and you get loosened up, and now all of a sudden those fears drop away. And
Oh yeah.
what ended up happening is I partied so much, whether I was predestined to do it or whatever, it became a dependency. And something was different about my drinking than the people that I hung out with. Everybody was always telling me, Scott, that's enough. And so when they were reaching that point in their drinking where they were starting to feel tipsy, the normal reaction was, okay, let's call it good there. But for me, it was a trigger to go. There came a point where I was for sure unable to quit on my own. And I could go into the long version of it. I got married at 18, and for the first 5 years created turmoil and violence. My wife was the same age and just as unhealthy as I was. So instead of leaving me, she just chose to try to fix me or stay and fight.
Earlier, we were talking about, I've been in Al-Anon for the better part of a decade, right? And I grew up in an alcoholic home, and married a couple alcoholics, and and then later discovered that I had that allergy myself. But man, I'll tell you, I'm a fixer, and I get it. And I was an unrecovered fixer for many, many, many years, so I can only appreciate in a very deep way what your wife went through.
Yeah. Well, being the alcoholic who was affecting everyone else around me, I saw that, and I tried quitting so many times. And there was just a reality that I couldn't, I was in trouble. I mean, I couldn't go 6 hours without having some kind of a drug or drink in my body. And that was just, it ended up being my only coping mechanism, whether I was happy, sad, mad, had to go to work, had a day off. Drinking and drugging was the alternative that I would do, and so I reached a point of helpless and hopelessness that very few people really get to experience this. And when I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, I heard a reading that was being read, and it was the description of the pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And if you just break that phrase down, man, pitiful, incomprehensible, you can't even understand it, demoralizing. I was the one doing this to my family, and it was a shameful place to be. So going from this hopeless, when I got into rehab, luckily they were all about the 12-step program, and it was go to meetings, get a sponsor, work the steps, and you have a chance, and so this God idea was the first step for me that really was a profound change. And I was told that God was going to be the solution one way or the other, the higher power. And it was God as I understood him. And I just had a little quiet moment with God as I understood him at the moment, and something changed, and I became willing, and all of a sudden I didn't have the craving that I couldn't overcome, and that to me was something I could hold on to. And I kept on, I wanted to work the steps. I wanted to go to any length to get this thing that was being offered, and that was 30 years ago. And that same woman has stuck with me throughout, and we've become really good friends over a long journey. Yeah.
Well, congratulations, Scott. I mean, I unfortunately know from personal experience that so many people, just in general, right, suffer with alcoholism, suffer with addiction, and they never get free of it. I like talking about this on this podcast, not because it necessarily has anything to do with marketing or anything to do with, business or whatever else. But the fact of the matter is that, this industry tends to attract a lot of alcoholics, tends to attract a lot, there tends to be a lot of addiction problems, and I think that it is something that people genuinely struggle with. And I know that AA is not the only way, right? There are other programs out there that help people get sober and get clean, and I'm all for that. My particular flavor of spirituality is 12 steps, right? 12 steps and some yoga kind of mixed into there, and some other
Beautiful.
other
If
type.
it works for you, right?
100%, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it being about the God of my understanding, right? At the end of the day, is it doesn't have to look or feel like what it looks or feels like for anybody else. It's really just, at the end of the day, can I attach myself to a higher power that will help me to, live a better life? And Scott, along those lines, that's kind of where you were, fast forward now a number of years, and without talking how you got from there to here, how is life for you now?
Very good. Along the way, I think I learned through the ups and downs of making mistakes that honesty and integrity has got to be the foundation of everything. Um, Anything I listen to on YouTube, or I listen to a lot of the law of attraction and different business-minded stuff, that um, it's got to start off with like a good intention. So in the program, I learned honesty, open-minded willingness. I learned that I was a liar by nature, and by correcting all those things, I became this guy that you could do business with, and you get what I say we're going to give you. And if we don't, gosh dang it, we'll try to make it right, So I think that doing what we say we're going to do is the biggest thing that has been successful for us, because I don't do a lot of advertising, and much marketing. I run a billboard. We do a little bit of MailChimp type of advertising, but most of our business is word of mouth and connections that we've made with contractors for repeat business. And those relationships are based on providing that service that they can count on. You know what I mean? So life has gotten pretty decent. Business is good based on that fundamental foundation.
I think it's a wonderful point, and you talk about integrity, right, and honesty, and obviously, the whole thing of recovery is first and foremost having to break out of denial and get honest about the fact that, like,
You're
I
doing
am
these
at the
things.
center of all my own problems.
Yeah.
Really, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, I'm the one driving the bus off the cliff quickly, and you talk about integrity. I think that what I love about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, as they're practiced in every 12-step fellowship out there, right, is this idea that eventually you're going to get to step 9.
Yeah.
And
The
you've and
amends.
that's right, the amends, right? And so the whole key in my estimation, I hate doing that, by the way. And so it's, once you clean up your side of the street, you really don't want to have to go back and keep doing that on a regular basis. And I think you're missing the point, anyway, if you do, right? There's some part that you're unwilling to really turn over to a power greater than yourself. And so I just really love that we get to kind of, preface talking about, what you've done with this, because I tend to agree wholeheartedly that it really is about honesty, it really is about integrity. So Scott, tell me then, we've talked a little bit about recovery. Talk to me about how Grimes Heating and Air came to be, what, and what led you from now, sobriety to owning your own business.
So early in recovery, my first real sponsor that worked the steps with me was an air conditioning guy, and just a small contractor. And I begged and pleaded, "Come on, man, put me to work." I was doing odds and ends, and he reluctantly put me to work. And I had a need to please kind of thing, so I would work endless hours. I would try to outwork anybody that we worked with, and became pretty good at the trade. And eventually we ended up partnering together in a business, he and I plus another guy, and we were doing restaurant heating and ventilation for franchise work. So my sponsor was the one who could sell the work, and he just kept it coming. And I would hit the road, and we had a crew, and we would work tirelessly, and we didn't know how to manage money, and there was a bit of an integrity issue with us of not hitting that mark of honesty and integrity. Ended up bankrupt in 3 years. So once that dust settled from the bankruptcy, it was 5 years later, I paid off that bankruptcy. I listened to Dave Ramsey a lot during this time, and managing your money was the biggest reason I felt like we failed. So, and the integrity was huge, that we got in such a pickle financially that we had to start cutting corners in some areas, and it was just bad business. And that was what I changed when I went back into business for myself. I was going to make sure that we weren't spending more than we were making, and that we were going to do what we say we do, honor that. And for the most part in the beginning, it was, I financed it as I went, and bought another buddy of mine's company out local to me, and together we built up the heating and air, pretty substantial. But he's in recovery also, and something that every meeting we would have, it's about providing the service that we're going to be proud of, that honesty and integrity. That's been a backbone to buying our way out of a lot of mistakes, and owning, repairs, that if somebody
Yeah.
messes something up, we just fix it. We don't try to shuffle it off on somebody else, and that's proven beneficial.
Well, when you started the business, you were probably just one man in a van then, right?
Yep, a couple of guys, part-time.
Okay. Okay. And what has your growth looked like since then? How many trucks do you guys have on the road, and what are you doing in annual revenue right now?
So we got 16 trucks on the road right now, and 33 employees. I think 5 are in the office, and several managers, and the rest are in the field. We're doing 6.5-ish million a year right now. And
Congratulations.
yeah, and that's been a growing pain as well. And we talked a little bit about the systems when I merged or bought my buddy's company. It was kind of more like a merger. He's such a powerful person. He's like a partner. We went from $1 million each a year to $2 million a year or more, and then we just steadily kept growing that. And the busier we got, the more out of control it felt, because I was doing things longhand, filling out notes myself and not having guys be accountable for their own time. And I was doing time reporting at the end of the week. And, so when I couldn't watch everybody, now I had to start trusting the guys to be honest about texting me their hours and stuff. I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning in a cold sweat, just terrified, because we were spending so much money on payroll. And where's that money coming from, And
Yeah.
at the time, I think we were maybe $10,000 a week in payroll. I didn't see where the money was coming in, so we ended up hiring a business coach. They came in-house for a year. They coached us in the field and in the office. So we got an accounting system that was bulletproof, or I wouldn't say bulletproof, but it was accountable to every dollar we spent and every man hour that was spent. We put GPS tracking on the trucks so that we could verify that the guys were where they say they were going to be, and everything got organized, right? So that now we can track everything. And that was difficult, getting the whole team to comply with those wishes, much harder than I care to admit.
Sure.
But once we had that in place, now I'm able to step back and watch the growth, and then simultaneously we opened up a construction division, same license number, different license. I got licensed as a general contractor. So underneath the same umbrella as my business name, we started doing these bathroom remodels. And since these systems were in place, I just literally shifted, put another man in place, and that division just is self-running, basically, with one real quality manager who is in recovery as well. And now we have a storage yard that my wife runs, and we bought a second storage yard next to us, and this growth started happening just one year after another. Something different would come up, and we now have a big storage yard with a bunch of houseboats. We have a local lake here, and we decided to open up a trucking service to serve, to move these big houseboats on and off the lake. And similarly, those same systems that we learned, I was able to implement that and have a small crew of guys, also in recovery, running that for me, So because of those systems, I've been able to put key people in place and then just kind of watch over the, from a telephone distance, I could answer questions or troubleshoot stuff. But man, I'm 80 or 90% set back, and being the business owner as opposed to the owner operator.
Well, that's really the place to really work toward. And gosh, man, I don't know that I'm 80% yet, but I'm I've gone from probably 30 to at least 60 in my own business. What's interesting though to me to hear you kind of talk about is it sounds like really the first systems that you implemented were financial systems.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's brilliant because there's several books out there that I think are fantastic. Profit First is one that kind of comes to mind that's been a real game changer for us. The idea of taking your profit first, but really, if you look at what that book is all about, it's all about smart financial decision making and smart financial systems. And it sounds like that's really kind of what you implemented. And I'm wondering, Scott, what for our listeners who might still be dealing with inconsistent profit or not knowing how they're going to make payroll, that sort of thing. What would you say are some of the key systems or things that they need to get in place right away to start ensuring their profitability?
I think for myself, being able to see the bigger picture, what is my real labor burden? If I have 10 guys running around on the job and, I'm only paying them $20 an hour, I'm doing the math in my head that it's 10 times $20 an hour, but I got this overhead, and I got my insurances, and each of them have a pair of guys in a truck, and I wasn't watching any of that. So to be able to see exactly what's being spent to run those 10 guys was my first awakening, like, oh man, no wonder I'm broke. I'm still bidding jobs at what me and the two guys that I started with. I mean, I could watch it very closely, and I could see at the end of that job, hey, we made $8,000, man, good job, that was a good week. Or but now doing that same job, I'm feeling like it should be profitable, but I wasn't measuring any of it. So mostly knowing what that cost was, because the guys I had working for me were good guys. They weren't stealing time or materials, so it was really just understanding what I was truly spending. That was my first move,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and then set my quotes accordingly,
Yeah.
especially the larger jobs we could take on. Now I've got a job that's going to last for 4 months. If I don't understand that labor burden or my overhead properly, I'm going to be working how many guys for 4 months straight, and then all of that cost of keeping that machine going, that's a big picture.
I think that you've really hit the nail on the head there too, frankly. I guess the way that I'll say this is that we've worked with companies across the gambit when it comes to marketing, right? So, I mean, we've worked with private equity backed, companies that have practically unlimited budgets, and seem to be able to just, throw money at things, sometimes maybe even frivolously, all the way down to startups, right, who are just dealing on a shoestring. And what I'm not terribly interested in talking about is the private equity side, because they've already got it figured out, right? Like the big companies, they already have the financial controls in place. They know what their overhead is. They understand all of this. But if you're just getting started, and you everybody starts out kind of the same way. We're word of mouth. And like you said, okay, I've got this guy at $20 an hour. I got this guy at $20 an hour. The truck is paid for. Maybe we got a little gas in there. Maybe we're even calculating our insurance, and we're able to go out and bid jobs and be profitable, because and we're still turning the screws, right? We're still very much in the labor, or very, very plugged in to the business. But then what happens is that as a natural part of that, word of mouth happens, and we continue to grow. And obviously in HVAC, if you're doing it right, it's like going to the dentist, right? Which is why I love the heating and air conditioning business, because you're in that home twice a year in spring and fall doing tune-ups. I think if you're doing it right, and especially if you're working maintenance contracts. But then inevitably, word of mouth starts to kind of dry up a little bit, or not dry up, but it hits its limit. It starts to hit a limit, and then you start looking at, okay, well, let's market. Okay, let's get out and do some marketing. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see smaller HVAC, plumbing, just any home service type contractor make, is that they start increasing their investments in marketing. They start wrapping trucks. They start doing different things to get their message out into the marketplace, but they don't include that into the burden, and they don't recoup those costs. And so it becomes an expense rather than an investment. And then it's a very easy expense to cut when things start going, poorly, but all of a sudden that starts coming out of your margin. And I think that what I've heard you say, and what I love about what I'm hearing you say, is that you are basically meticulously understanding what your costs are, and then figuring out how to allocate your costs across every single job to make sure that you're profitable on every single job. And have I missed the mark here? Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, and it seems meticulous. I think I was actually shown how to create that formula, just based on the expenses, and now I know which divisor to use when I've got X amount of man hours. So I couldn't tell you what my insurance annually is without looking at a spreadsheet. I couldn't tell you. I could tell you what payroll is, but there's other factors that I'm not factoring in. But I know that when we look at the total annual budget, and we figure out what that divisor is and what our total estimated man hours for the year are, or we can break that down where we got a multiplier on on our quote software that we just figure out our material and our man hours and we put in that divisor and it gives us that price. I'm not watching it very closely. I was just shown how to gather that information based on what we've spent. And at the end of the day, I have, like, my daughter is the office manager and she's brilliantly uh, hardcore about this system. I mean, you got to follow this system. You didn't input your numbers right, and so she orchestrates all that behind the scenes and presents me basically with the financial outcome during our financial meetings. It's actually my daughter and my niece that do this. But as far as advertising and truck wrapping and stuff like that, I did do all my vehicle wraps just because I felt like that was a long-term, quiet advertising way of advertising. But once I learned it, it's not too intricately watched, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
I get my budget numbers, and if we're over on labor or whatever, we just try to problem solve as to what happened on that job or what happened over that last month that we need to correct.
You've alluded to your daughter coming in, and really there's a point where you need a controller, period. You've got
That
to
might
have a
be
controller.
that might be the step that I'm at, because my daughter does do that. My son-in-law stepped in actually kind of as the systems manager, where is it systems, or he oversees like all the vehicles, all of the making sure all time cards are put in correctly, and bugs the guys when they don't. There's a combination of that.
Kind of like your ops manager, operations manager.
But I haven't let go of any decision making, so I'm still tethered. And I don't know that. I don't know how to make that next move.
Well, I'll tell you, as a couple of recovering alcoholics, I think letting go is probably one of the hardest things. So,
Yeah.
I get that too. I struggle with that as well. It's right, and we're hitting on a different point that I don't think we necessarily, meant to start out talking about, but there really is genuine power in being able to let go. And I would caveat that to say that those systems really give you the freedom to be able to do that with some relative safety. Yes, you still need to have your checks and balances, right? You still need to have people that are overseeing these various aspects. But to the extent that I'm able to let go of these things that I think that I'm the only one that's uniquely qualified to do, right? Maybe that's part of that terminal uniqueness, that we talk about. But when I can let go, that's where genuine freedom starts to happen. And what I have noticed in my own business is the more that I remove myself from all of these decisions that have to be made and all of these processes that have to be managed, and we develop good quality process, and then we get good quality people to run said process, and we've just got a scorecard that we can follow on, in our weekly meetings. The more I get myself out of the way, the faster we grow.
Yeah.
What's been your experience there?
The difficulty in replacing service technicians or qualified guys. So I've had to train most of my guys, and maybe I've allowed some bad habits to develop, calling in sick on Mondays regularly, and not really putting my foot down out of fear of not being able to replace them,
Yeah.
and that's a bad angle to come at it with, because I've got a couple of guys who are very long-term guys with us that those are the decisions that I still hold on to, that if we dealt with things with an iron fist, we would possibly lose the guys that need to be nourished, or I don't know, so that's been my difficulty, is not being firm enough, perhaps, in fear of not being able to replace the manpower, the qualified manpower.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really good point, though, that is genuinely a problem across the entire HVAC industry, the MEP, contractors, and that is that there is a significant labor shortage, right? And, I remember growing up in the I mean, I was born in the late '70s and grew up in the in the '80s, right? And the big thing was go be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever else. My parents and very few people I knew were saying go be a plumber.
Yeah.
What's funny to me now is that you've got guys that have gone to law school that are coming out with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt that are making less than a journeyman plumber, or in some cases maybe even an apprentice plumber or HVAC tech or whatever else that doesn't have that that debt and that burden. So Dave Ramsey, right? And then this whole thing kind of comes to mind. So I think the verdict is still out on how wise the parents were of my generation, at least, and coaching children to not be in the trades. But
Yeah.
all the same, that is fundamentally the biggest challenge that I see every single home service contractor out there have right now, is that we would love to be able to do more volume. We really can't get the people to be able to do it. And so they really do then end up doing exactly what you have done. And I have to do this, if I'm being real about it, in my own business too. I mean, the fact of the matter is there's just not a lot of free floating SEO experts out there that are looking for jobs, because chances are if they're that good, they've started their own agency. And so, we have to also train people to really do our systems and be able to think on their own and whatever else. But within this framework, what has that training process look like for you guys to kind of get around, or try to get around at least this shortage of labor?
So I think this is Dave Ramsey may be the theme of his Entre Leader book.
Yeah.
So I'll find a quality young man who's eager to please, wanting to do the good job, and we'll feed that guy of training, opportunity, pay scale based on hey, if you want to go up, this is what you have to learn to do that. And
Mhm.
so having that structure, out of 100% of my guys, I trained them from 18-year-old kid. I don't have anybody on not my partner. I take that back. The guy that I bought his company, he still pretty much runs all the HVAC. He and I grew up together in the trades, but all of our workers have a skill set based on what they learned on the job with us. So finding somebody who's got skills, they've already got a job, and if they're looking for a job, there's probably something wrong with them. I'd say that pretty rudely, but I mean, they're either drinkers, they're arrogant, they're argumentative,
Right.
yeah.
Right. They hop, you know. We see that a lot, right? We see a lot of qualified people hop from place to place where they can get the best commission structure because they know, otherwise
They're in
you're
high demand.
that's right,
Yeah.
Yep.
But guess what? Winter comes and my guys stay busy. I've had
Yeah.
a couple of guys that were very good that we trained, and they just wanted more than I was willing to go, and basically during the pinch of summer quit for a $5 an hour raise, and then they were laid off that winter. And I get the phone call right before winter, hey, you got anything going? So, I'll try, but man,
Do you take them back, Scott, or
I understand the game, and if I could get something sold where I needed them, I would. More is not necessarily better. If so, I've scaled down because I've got construction in the trucking company and some other income aspects. I've learned. I think we were talking about this before the previous conversation. I took on an apartment complex job. This is my sixth one, and these are the biggest jobs I've done. $2 million job.
Mhm.
With the systems that we're running and being able to track the labor and the money, I'm realizing that that it's not a profitable job. So I'm able to keep a group of guys busy for a year or two at a time. But man, is it worth it to have so much infrastructure and busyness going on and trucks driving and to not make an adequate profit? To think that we were going to make a 10% profit, to come to find out it might even be just a 1% profit.
right?
What did we do wrong? And I'm not sure that I could go down a rabbit hole with those type of jobs. You just race to be the lowest bidder, and
Right.
it's after being able to watch it over and over again, I'm realizing I've got to be at a certain price point, or what's the point? So I'm trying to reduce my needed guys to hit that 25% profit margin would be beautiful, doing half the work or less than half the work and still hitting that profit margin. So
Well, I think you've hit a really good point there, honestly, Scott, and that is, it's we're kind of the same way, right? I mean, volume is great, right? And cash is king, and cash flow is really really important, right? Get it. That's how you cover the payroll nut. It's how but there's also this reality too that if you're not watching the actual profitability, right? Like if you're not really looking at your margin in terms of that actual net percentage that you're making, and you're not meticulously making sure that number stays healthy, then you're right. It's a way more stress. I mean, all things being equal, we find that with our clientele, we have certain clients that are really really profitable, easier to work with, certain ones that are not, and so we've largely started moving away from startups because of that reason. Because it's just they require a lot more work. They usually can't pay as much. They're inconsistent in paying sometimes, right? And at the end of the day, our margin just suffers, and so we end up doing more work for less money than if we just went out and worked with somebody who is a little bit more established, has their stuff together. They've got some internal systems, people to that we can actually coordinate with. So we're getting more assistance in terms of what we need. But really, I think this whole idea, and we see this quite a bit, I think, in this industry too, when we're especially as we're talking about acquisitions. Okay, but this idea that revenue is king, right? That top line revenue is the only thing that matters. And I would much rather own a $5 million top line revenue company doing a 25% margin than a $10 million top line revenue company doing a 8% margin. It's half the work for a lot more money at the end of the day, and I think that's kind of what you're hitting on there.
and you got to get your ego out of the way, because I really took pride in, oh, look at all the work we got going. Having a lot of work and a lot of trucks running around and a lot of guys showing up and a bunch of employee vehicles in the employee parking lot, it's kind of like, man, look at this. But then, how much money are you making?
Right.
That's the real question.
Bigger is not always better, I think is the
Yeah,
is the key.
yeah.
Well, Scott, other than the financial systems, if you were talking with a heating and air company that's trying to get to that 15, 16 truck mark, maybe they're half of that. What other what other systems do they really need to have in place? What other key personnel do they really need to have in place to be able to move up to that closer to 10 million mark?
Management.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my daughter coming into the business maybe 4 years ago really took ownership over the office, where um, we were floundering a little bit in really keeping track of everything. And then had my nephew stepped up and was just a busybody employee that would call me the night before. Hey man, did you order a crane for that job? Oh shoot, man, I forgot. So he was keeping me accountable. So I ended up moving him into a management level, just out of sheer busybodiness. He was watching
Yeah.
everybody's job anyways. And so having these people who could be accountable for these different aspects is and own their position and not complain about uh, the job being the job. It was,
Yeah.
they were complaining about the job not being done. So to me, I think that allows you to grow.
Yeah.
Without help, man, you're not going to do it on your own. It's definitely building a team and a hierarchy that you have somebody who's given the power to make those internal decisions.
Yeah, I think autonomy is huge. honestly, because if I'm if I'm only halfway, in, if I'm giving somebody the responsibility without the authority, to be able to actually make the decisions they need to make, then I'm really just cutting them off at the knees, and keeping myself very plugged into my own business, right? There's no freedom that can really come from that.
Yeah, which might highlight one of my growing pains right now is fully trusting that I can let go and with who I've put into place, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Well, when we have this conversation again a year from now in a follow up, Scott, that's what I'm going to ask you is, all right, man, how much were you able to let go, and what have the results been, since?
My current goal.
And we'll be on the same journey, just so you know. Okay. I
Yeah, you
also,
got it.
I have this cool tattoo here. I don't know if you can see this, but it comes out of yoga and this idea of a parigreha, which is really non-grasping, non-greed. But I really like to think of it as just letting go, right? And in 12 step, we talk about one of the slogans, let go, let God. And that's definitely one of the issues that I see, and why, for me that's important to remember that on a regular basis, because I do tend to want to try to control everything, and it's all fear driven, right? It's all about, gosh, if I don't hold on to this, it's all going to come apart without me. And so there's my ego, right, popping in there a little bit, like, the if I don't control this, and if I don't, try to stay very very involved, then everything's just going to go to hell in a handbasket. Of course, the universal principle of all of that is that when we let go, it really does give us the freedom to from that fear, I think, more than anything.
To let it be what it's going to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to say I think that's my current level of where I'm at,
Yeah.
because I feel like my decision making or my choices got us to where we're at. And if somebody's not following that to the T, you know, letting my guys not be totally accountable all the time because of the manpower issue, is that good or bad? I'm not too sure, but we've been able to keep staffed this way. We're just having to play the game with accountability to some degree. And having my staff telling me the reason that it's this way is because you're not holding these guys accountable. So
Right.
they want to hold them accountable more. And there you go, fear. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's where that service manager role is, kind of that next step, right? And maybe just putting the separation between, me and I feel that, I'm the same way, right? It's I've brought this to this point, and it's been my decision making and my knowledge and my experience and my direction and my drive, all these things, me. Um,
That's that's great,
it's
actually.
yeah, and but the thing is too is that, and I've started doing this most recently. I've hired a sales guy. You've met him, Matt. And he does our account executive stuff, and he also is our account manager and is working directly with the clients right now, which has been absolutely fantastic. And I was telling you about a trip that I took out to California, where I kind of rode a little bit north of you anyway, there out to Crescent City on the bike. And while I was gone, we made, I want to say, 3 sales. Um, I had nothing to do with it. Didn't touch it at all. And I really, it's like, well, I'm the one who's driven this thing. And it just letting go of my own ego, that I'm the only one that can do this and do it right. There's that perfectionism, right, that kind of kicks in, uh, that we're aware of in terms of our defects of character. But the reality is that if you have just a good framework, and you hire people who are intrinsically motivated on their own, and want to do a good job, and like you said, want to please, right? But really, they want to show up in the same way that you want to show up, and you hire for that cultural fit, and then you just let them do what you've hired them to do. Miraculous things start to happen, and I know
Okay.
you've seen that, right? And then
I,
and there's always the struggle of going back and trying to grab control again.
I think the similarities are great. The current event I feel that I'm working on is kind of what you were keying on. You got to hire people and trust that letting go is going to be okay. You know,
Yeah, it's hard.
it's it's hard. It's a challenge, especially when you think that you know the path that is the right path.
Sure.
Though it's not working all that great, it's still working.
I like to be right, that's my will, right? That's my ego kicking in. Well, start to wrap this up then. I try to ask this question of everybody who comes on because this is the Home Services Marketing from Growth to Acquisition podcast.
Yeah.
And I think I might already know the answer of this one because it seems like what you're really starting to do is position your family to, eventually maybe take this thing over. But do you see an acquisition or a future, or what are your plans to for the continuancy of Grimes Heating and Air when Scott Grimes is no longer running the show?
Yeah. So because I've got so much family involved, my daughter doesn't really want to stay connected in it too much. Possibly my nephew, but the other core guys that I have, I wouldn't want to do a business acquisition and leave those guys high and dry in some way. I'm working on another company right now that I think is going to be catastrophically a success, but I've got to let it happen before I can let go. And if that happens, I'll probably proposition my primary HVAC buddy and ask him if he wants to roll over all of our assets into his company. And then the guy that's running my construction, maybe the same thing. Then again, if it's all running fine, we might just keep it the way it is, and that way everybody's got a secure, steady life, 'cause,
Yeah.
my main managers have put a lot of their heart and soul into this as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think I would sell.
Okay. Well, I love that. Scott, this has been definitely one of the funnest shows I've done in a hot minute, man. I don't get the
Appreciate it, man.
opportunity to talk about recovery and spirituality and all these different things. For our listeners again here, I've been joined today by Scott Grimes from Grimes Heating and Air. They're out of Orville, California. And Scott, if another HVAC plumbing contractor somewhere wanted to talk to you, what would be a good way that they could find you and have a conversation?
Yeah, Grimes Heating and Air is, I think we have Facebook and all that stuff. I don't really know, but out of Orville, California, reach out to my office.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, friends, again, I'm Adam Loveridge with Blue Forge Marketing. This has been another episode of the Home Services Marketing Growth to Acquisition podcast. Joined here again with Scott Grimes from Grimes Heating and Air. Scott, thanks again so much for joining me.